to another edition of the Energy Week Podcast. Ryan Ray alongside Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going?
It's going great. I am coming to you from the amazing place, Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. I have never been to Pennsylvania. It is a spot I'd like to go to. There's actually a conference up there in a few weeks, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it. But alas, what's the weather like up there? Because it's hot down here in Texas.
It's actually amazing. It's like 70. It's cold. I'm freezing. It is a high of 98 back in Jacksonville, Florida, where so I'm freezing. I'm wearing pants and a sweatshirt.
Yeah, we have a big party coming up at our house Saturday. My wife was telling me, she said it's I think the high is 97 for Saturday or something like that. And we're like, oh, man. So a couple quick things, just in case I forget to announce it. I will be in Midland this week at the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast Shrimp Bowl. So if you are a listener and you're in Midland, you want to come hang out, be out in Midland, TexasOilAndGasPodcast.com/shrimp. It's 10 to get in. If you don't buy tickets, we will have tickets at the door. But all the information is there. I wanted to mention that in case we have any Midland listeners. Ellen, we got a lot to get into. We have a guest coming on. So let's start with our favorite topic as of late, Iran. And, you know, I gotta give myself a little attaboy here that I floated this idea out there a few weeks ago that the U.S. government might blame the Iranians for this. The Iranians might deny it, and we might have a slight escalation. And despite the fact I am a right-wing propagandist, I should point out that John Bolton has been known to accuse people of doing things for war purposes that they found out later didn't actually do. 2003 Iraq. But with all that being said, Ellen, oil prices are responding. The market's kind of moving around looking at all this. What's your take on where we headed with this?
Yeah, so I actually, this is interesting. I think this is all part. So does anyone out there remember that right after this tanker sabotage thing happened, Bolton, I believe, went out there to meet with people in the UAE. And it was like he flew right out there, met with them, and then came back and he said, we had a good meeting and we're offering our assistance in this investigation. So here's what I think happened. And I could be totally wrong. I've been totally wrong before, but here's what I think happened. I think he went out there and he said, look, you guys need to build a case with your Arab buddies against Iran. If you think they're behind this, and could be, could not be. It could have been one of these groups that gets support from Iran, but doesn't really get direction from Iran. But anyway, if you think they're behind, you go and you build support with your Arab buddies. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we saw the Saudis have this emergency meeting of the Arab League and the GCC, and you invited the Qataris even, and everyone headed out to Saudi Arabia during Ramadan, and they issued this statement, we want international involvement because they're attacking us. And I think this was all coordinated, and that Bolton told them that we will take this to the UN. And so I think this was all kind of done in concert to get this all to the UN. And you can see they're saying, Iran was behind these attacks on the oil tank, which didn't do much damage. Remember what happened? The worst thing, look, not good to attack ships. We need freedom of the seas. But nothing really happened other than that it caused a very small fuel oil spill, which is bad. We should not be spilling our, crappy fuel into the water. That's not good for anybody. But I do think that they're looking to build this case against Iran in the UN. I think that the U.S. is going to ask for more sanctions, some kind of UN sanctions against Iran based on this. And they're looking for the GCC and all these other Arab countries to back them up. And I think they're going to find that they get to the Security Council and there's going to be a veto because China is not going to want to support this and Russia's probably not going to support this. And so I think they're going to get a veto. But I think that's what they're looking for. I really see this as they're trying to get back those UN sanctions that were removed as a result of the deal. The nuclear deal.
I agree with large portions of what you're saying there. I don't actually think the Trump administration is looking for war. I think they enjoy the rhetoric of war. But we can see. One of the things I've been following, and it struck me on an article we covered on the show a few weeks ago, was Venezuela's primary backers are China and Russia. And then you saw today, I don't know if you caught this article or not, but Russia's pulling out of Venezuela. They have a big security firm, and they're saying, hey, they can't keep sending their guys down there. And so when we look at these things in a broader scope, I know we have an article here coming up next that says, talking about the Chinese delegation and the trade talks, but there's also been reports since this article was released that China is willing to come back to the table and talk. It feels like we have to remember that all of these things, for us, they're kind of individualistic, U.S. versus Iran, but with what's going on at the international level, China, Russia, U.S., Venezuela, and North Korea, all these countries are linked up through various agreements and exchanges and things that they're working on. And so, on some level, the Trump administration might be looking to bolster the Iranian stuff here just to get some leverage on some other things they're looking to deal with on some of these Chinese negotiations.
Yeah, exactly. And it seemed like the Russians are pulling out mostly because they're not getting paid, which honestly, good for them. Good for the Russians.
Thing.
Did you see? I don't know if these were authentic, but I don't know. They could have been authentic. I saw them on Twitter. Someone posted photos of these Russian soldiers who were in some bakery in Caracas. I think one of our Twitter friends, Jose, said that bakery is around the corner from him. And these guys, these huge beer guts. And someone was like, "Are they really Russian soldiers? Because they don't look so in shape."
Yeah, well, no, but that is fair to point out. They were pulling out because they weren't getting paid, not because it was any moral or ethical dilemma they found themselves in. So, but speaking of, what I was just mentioning, our next piece from CNBC, U.S. oil falls 5.5% to $53.50 per barrel on fresh trade worries. Now, this came out on Friday. I know the Chinese mentioned, I think in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article yesterday, I believe, that they are prepared to reopen negotiations. Of course, you also have the tariffs with Mexico. What's that?
Yeah, well, those tariffs on Mexico, it was like the minute they were announced, oil just started dropping like a stone.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure. Yeah, to my knowledge, the administration. So on the side of the fact that they're trying to tariff everyone in the world, he hasn't actually put a deadline on when they're coming in. It was more of a they will come in. Is that correct?
I thought there was June. I thought that okay, here we say the plan would impose a 5% tariff on Mexican imports starting on June 10th and increase monthly up to 25% on October 1st. And they're not saying that there are, and one of the big issues with the tariff, with these planned tariffs, is that there are no exemptions for energy. And U.S. and Mexico, I mean, there's a lot of energy trade going on there. I mean, we've got natural gas, we've got oil, we've got products, everything is going back and forth. And so, it's, I wouldn't be surprised to see energy exempted, as this gets clearer. And part of the issue with these tariffs is that, when you're looking at what's going on with China, the tariffs are a reaction to the fact that China is basically has tariffs on, that this is an unfair trade situation. But saying to Mexico, we're going to put tariffs on your imports, on imports from Mexico because of something it's an issue that's, I mean, I guess we see it as an economic issue, but this is not an issue related to trade. This is an issue related to immigration. I mean, I guess you could make an argument, well, immigration or migrants are kind of are an economic issue and do affect trade and do affect a lot of economic issues, but it's not it's not like we have no tariffs on your stuff, but you've got essentially what amounts to tariffs on our stuff. So we're going to put tariffs until you really do get rid of, that's right. A trade issue. This is like an economic answer to a policy, a foreign policy. You could argue that, which is why I think it's a big deal, because it's basically like economic warfare.
Yeah, and from the tweets I was reading from President Trump, he said that that not only you have the issues that you brought up, but it's also going to stop the drugs. And I had to chuckle because we've been in a drug war longer than any other war we've ever been in, and that's not stopped anything. So if the tariffs solve it, he will go down in history as the greatest person in history of mankind because taxes solved it all. We didn't know that a few little tariffs. However, it seems that will worsen things. Now, with China and Iran, we've talked about the ability for them to try to outweigh it. Iran they just seem kind of set in their mindset from what you've told us on this show is, what, they're going to see if Trump can win a re-election or not. The Chinese, you get mixed reports over how long they can last. The Mexican economy is not that great, obviously. And unlike these other stories we talked about, they really don't seem to have a lot of big allies, like a China or a Russia that's kind of backing them in this. They're almost kind of isolated, which would probably give Trump some advantage to get some of the things he's looking to do here. I would guess. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, this is a real, I can see why Trump is extraordinarily frustrated with the way that Mexico is handled these migrant issues, because Mexico really could stop them at their other border. And Mexico actually has a very strict immigration policy as compared to the United States. And so I can see why he's very frustrated in trying to get this done. The wall is been stymied by issues in the United States for all various legal and fiscal issues. It's been stymied. A lot of people do think that a wall would really solve this problem. Other people don't think it would solve the problem. That's not a debate I want to weigh in on. Mm-hmm. But it's it's an interesting idea to use tariffs as a means to pressure Mexico to do more with this migrant and immigration issue, because that's an issue that will really affect them. And so say you're a company that's saying, like, okay, look, I was building my cars in Mexico and, I can't build them in China. Right. Can I build them? Vietnam is looking like the biggest beneficiary from all this stuff. But would you really if you build cars in Mexico, you're really going to move it to Vietnam? Right. At this point, you're thinking, my God, okay, so, is nowhere safe from tariffs? What if Trump wins he wins re-election again, which I think is a very distinct, I would not bank on Trump not winning re-election. What are you going to do? You're going to have to build your cars in the United States.
Right.
Possibly. I just think this energy thing, I don't know, for all Mexico is going to come up and they're going to come to some agreement and they're not going to, none of these tariffs will actually go into place, but they could. Trump has shown he will follow through on this. I just wonder if the energy issue is going to end up getting some sort of an exemption, because there is so much back and forth. On the other hand, Pemex still has a lot of issues. And so, they need our gasoline. Are they going to be willing to put tariffs on American gasoline that's going to hurt Mexicans? They subsidize their gasoline and they're buying our gasoline. Is Pemex willing to take the hit on, are they going to put tariffs on our stuff? Because generally, we put tariffs on their stuff coming into our country. They're going to respond with reciprocal tariffs. Right. But can they afford to do that when it comes to gasoline?
Yeah, I think he does. Unlike the other deal, he has a little bit more leverage here. Not just something you mentioned, not too much to get into the immigration issue, but I listened to a podcast the other day, and if the listeners are interested, it was Joe Rogan's podcast. He had a guy named Ed Calderon, I think is how you say it, Calderon. It's episode 1302 of Joe Rogan Experience. He is a former police officer who worked in Mexico and talks about just what it's like to work as a security police officer down there, and I thought that was quite fascinating. Of course, this all broke before the latest news with the trade war. So, for listeners who are interested on just someone who's from that side of it, what he's seen, what he's experienced, obviously it's one man's opinion, but I thought that might be worth passing along. Speaking of big news, Ellen, this sent shockwaves through the world from the New York Times. Freedom Gas, the next American export.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Of course,
like freedom fries.
Yes, like
freedom fries, freedom gas.
You should have known this was a Rick Perry quip. It's just embarrassing at this point. I don't know how you feel about it. I saw that and I was like, oh God, oh please,
Of all the things to attach a freedom moniker to, gas is like not the one you want. Like freedom, like that just has like really bad images. Like, I could just see like some marketing people being like, no, that really just wasn't what you want to be known for. Like a smelly thing. I mean, come on.
I just thought about this. What if you took the opposite and you said like,
authoritarian gas, tyrannical gas.
But like, what if OPEC labeled their oil something like, I don't even know what they would come up with, but some kind of anti-freedom slogan oil or something like that. It would kind of be weird. It would, to say the least, and we probably wouldn't want to buy it. But this is why we shouldn't pay government officials, because they come up with terrible ideas like this. I think you're right. Anybody that had a marketing background would be like, no, gas. Freedom, that's probably not the way we want to go. Oh God.
Wasn't this the department? We should be exporting more LNG, guys. Let's export our gas.
Exactly.
People want it.
Just real quick before we move on, wasn't this the department that he wanted to get rid of? Perry, the one he heads up now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was. And you know what's so funny though is I think he maybe didn't when he was running for president, he had all those departments and which is amusing, but it was also amusing because he didn't quite realize, I think, when he was doing that the Department of Energy, the vast majority of stuff that the Department of Energy deals with is just like nuclear waste and these are actually really important government functions.
Stuff, but it's not what you would think of it, right?
Yeah, you do not want to say, here, states, you have control of your of this nuclear arsenal. I mean, like that's actually an important. And I gotta admit, like, I mean, I'm a small. I think that government is definitely overly expansive and needs to be cut down. But one of the things that government definitely has been doing right is the Energy Information Agency, because I know it's not perfect and I know there are issues with it, but in terms of getting information that's useful and that I actually use and have positive interactions with, that department is like rates, above just about every other department that I've ever had to engage with in the federal government. So of all the things, I do think the Energy Department is doing something right.
If we had a producer for this show, Ellen, maybe he could reach out to someone with that organization and get them. If only we had a producer like Nate to go out and do such a task, that would be terrific. But I'm not holding my breath. Okay, let's turn on now to Reuters. Russia's May oil output hits 11-month low on dirty oil crisis. Now, this story, it won't go away. It really seems like when we first talked about it, it was kind of like a cute, funny, obviously there's problems, but it's like, oh, God, they have dirty oil. But that's been probably, a month ago? And this story is not going away, and it seems like there's, I don't want to say new developments necessarily, but just every time you think it's gone, here it comes back. When will this end, you think?
This is a huge issue. And it's funny because Russia was supposed to cut oil production and now it's being forced to, and it's had to cut it even more. It says Russian oil output has fallen to 11.11, what a great number, million barrels per day in May, which is its lowest level since June 2018. And it's fallen even from April. In April, it was 11.23 million barrels per day. So, it's not like a huge amount when you're talking about pumping 11 million barrels of oil a day. But, what's interesting is, this Druzhba pipeline usually ships 1 million barrels a day. That's 1% of global oil demand. I mean, that's a lot of oil. Right. And they've actually had to cut production. Apparently, they've also been... So, okay, what do you do with all of this contaminated oil? You've got to store it somewhere. And they're trying to sell it now. Anyone want to buy some oil that's contaminated? Call Transneft, because they will hook you up. But so now apparently they're slightly below their quota, it seems, possibly, which is interesting. And that's really going to change the dynamic in OPEC, because now Saudi Arabia can't say to Russia, come on, Russia, like, show us your cuts. Russia is now being forced to cut involuntarily. And they really, part of the biggest issue here has been the really poor information management, because they said 2 weeks tops. Well, I think people who probably have experience with this kind of contamination knew that it would take much longer to actually, clean out this pipeline. But you've got people in Russia saying, yeah, it's solved, it's fixed, everything's fixed. And then you've got refineries saying, we're not getting shipments of clean oil yet. So they really failed in the messaging department. They needed some PR help. Rick Perry needs marketing help. They could have used some PR crisis management help, but this is really continuing to affect things. Of course, it doesn't affect the market as a whole, because all the oil market seems to care about right now is trade. And if you look, I saw a really interesting tweet. I'll try to maybe find it and retweet it for our listeners who follow me on Twitter. But it showed the change in long positions being held by various different trading organizations, like investment banks, this and that, and in different parts of the oil market, and they have just dumped their longs. No one is long on oil right now. I mean, it was like a huge, and so that you can see that's why oil prices fell. Everyone was selling, and all they are concerned about is this trade stuff. And I just wonder if they're going too overboard at this point. I get the argument, but it just seems like it's gone on way too far.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing I was going to ask you is, it seems like, I mean, when we kind of touch on this from time to time is, if this story was in 2003 and this pipeline was shut down, the prices would be out the roof. I know inventories are building somewhat right now, but but even with that, it's not enough this is actual physicals that are coming off the market, whereas this other stuff is potentials. It would seem that this should have a bigger impact on what the market's trading, whether it's what may or may not happen. Does that maybe say, I agree with what you're saying about your little concern, but does it also maybe say that maybe the price was just overinflated again and just kind of had creeped up there a little more than we'd realized?
I don't think that the price was overinflated, because if you look at what should be happening, you've got Iran is down, Venezuela is down. You've got a shortage in heavy oil. You've got Russia down. You've got, the Saudis are down voluntarily. And, they say they're willing to increase, but they're not going to just increase for no reason. And they're not getting orders from Asia. Of course, keep in mind, the Saudis decide to raise their prices for Asia. So it's not like they're cutting Asian buyers a deal here. They're prepared to take advantage of it. But I just think that there's so much negative outlook in the economy, and the trade stuff is lumping onto that prices are way down. Now, I wonder, honestly, if keeping prices this low will actually help kind of fuel things, because China will look at it and say, well, I can buy American oil for $60 a barrel, or 58 or 55 or whatever it is now. And, so we're just going to keep buying and buying as opposed to not buying, because China just likes to buy when prices are low and stick it in storage for a rainy day. But, and I heard somewhere that they were saying that some of this depends on whether the Chinese government decides to do more stimulus.
Yeah.
And if they do, we'll get, things may start to look up.
Yep. Well, we will see that for sure over the next few weeks. But I am kind of surprised, like you are, that the prices are not heading the opposite direction. And as promised, up next we have a guest on, Eric Peters, who is the owner, operator, and extraordinary writer at epautos.com. We'll link to that in the show notes. Eric, as I mentioned to you offline, it's great to have you on. I've heard you on Tom Wood's show, so for listeners who want to hear more of Eric's stuff, that would be an easy spot to go to, Tom Wood's show, and probably his website has a lot of other spots that you can find him at. But Eric, thank you for being on Energy Week Podcast today. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm pretty well. If I sound a little goofy, it's because I picked up a cold over the weekend, so apologies for that.
No, that's okay. It happens to the best of us. Okay, let's get into it. First off, let's start with electric vehicles, Tesla.
Sure.
Before we maybe we like to pick on Tesla on this show from time to time, or at least Elon.
Yep.
Before we do that, walk us through where we are with the EV market. Ellen and I have kind of expressed our opinions, but from someone who actually follows the market like you do, I'm curious, where are EVs? Are they getting viable? Are they close to getting viable? Or are they still a long way to go?
Well, they're not really viable at all, despite the almost nonstop media coverage. You'd think that EVs are everywhere. In fact, they only constitute about 1% of the total number of vehicles that are on the road, and the majority of those are in states like California and Arizona, which have essentially production mandates that require any car company that's selling vehicles in those states to sell a certain number of electric cars. So the whole thing is it's a forced onto the market thing, which gets us into the whole topic of practical viability. Most of the problems that have plagued electric cars for the past 100 years continue to plague them, and the two chief ones are the high cost, the limited range, and then there's the peripheral but very much related one of long recharge times. Even at the, as they're styled, fast chargers, you're talking about a minimum of a 30 to 45 minute hookup. And, how many times faster, how many times slower is that than the 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes at most that it takes you to fill up your IC engined car? So for most people, they're just not that practical. And for most people, they're simply unaffordable. That's the nutshell analysis of it.
One thing, and maybe I heard this from you, and we've talked about on the show, I guess two things really is one, if you were to go in the market and buy an EV, what, how long will the battery last? What's the process of replacing that battery? But then two, and I think maybe you mentioned this somewhere I've heard, or someone brought this up, is there actually going to be enough spare parts for second and third tier owners?
Well, the real problem is the cost of replacing the battery of an EV relative to the value of the EV itself. EVs have inherently shorter useful lives than IC cars. Almost any modern IC car, provided you don't abuse it and provided you don't get one of the very infrequent lemons, will typically go for 15 plus years before it begins to suffer serious mechanical failures that make junking it the right thing to do. An electric car, on the other hand, its battery will begin to degrade in performance after about 7 or 8 years, sometimes a lot less, and that's just an inherent problem with battery chemistry and charging and discharging cycling. Same thing with your 12-volt starter battery that's in your car. After a period of time, it gets weaker. It can't hold the charge anymore. But it only costs about $100 to replace the 12-volt battery in your car, whereas replacing an electric car's battery pack can amount to many thousands of dollars. But if your EV is only worth, let's say, $7,000 or $8,000 after 8 years, are you going to put a $4,000 battery pack into it? And the answer is probably not.
So tell us a little bit more. I mean, what happens to these EV batteries once either the car is no longer usable or the battery is? Is there any, how is the industry dealing with the battery issue of either dead batteries or no longer usable batteries? What happens to them?
That's largely been unexplored because, again, the number of EVs on the road is relatively small and they're also relatively new. Keep in mind that Tesla's been only in operation for 12, 13, 14 years, something like that. And the other manufacturers have only recently begun to roll out electric cars. If you went back 6 or 7 years, essentially nobody was making electric cars except for Tesla. So we really don't know yet what's going to happen if and when large numbers of electric cars on the road, what's going to happen to these batteries. I'm assuming that they'll come up with some way to recycle them and dispose of them. But that's going to be another big undertaking. And of course, you've got an environmental issue there as well, because these batteries, you're talking about several hundred pounds of them for each EV. Contain a lot of really nasty and caustic materials that are going to have to be dealt with.
One of the other curious issues, so who is an EV right for? Like, who would be the right person to buy an EV? Well,
leaving aside just you like the technology, and there's nothing wrong with that. I get accused of being anti-electric car, and I'm not. That's the farthest thing from the truth. I'm not anti-Porsche either. I'd like to have a Porsche. The problem is I can't afford one. And I would be mad if my neighbor demanded that I help him buy his Porsche. So for the same reason, I object to being taxed and mulcted to help other people buy electric cars. I think if they can make it on their own on the market, great. Good news for them. Go ahead and build it. Go ahead and buy it. I think that's wonderful. But for most people, the math does not add up. The least expensive electric vehicle on the market right now is the Nissan Leaf, and that retails for $30,000. Wow. And essentially what you've got is a vehicle that's comparable to Nissan's Versa, which is their entry-level sedan. And you can pick up a Versa brand new for about $14,000, okay? So that's half the price of the Leaf. And you run the numbers, and how much gas does $15,000 buy? The difference between the Versa and the Leaf.
Right.
And the Versa can go 300 plus miles easily on a tank of fuel. The Leaf goes about 150. Best case scenario, I always mention that, they don't put the asterisks by the range on an electric car. The touted range is always best case, assuming that you drive with a very light foot, that you don't use a lot of the accessories, including things like the air conditioning and the heat. You guys might remember in the middle of the winter when we had that really bad cold snap, there was actually some pretty significant media coverage of people in states in Michigan and other places who had electric cars, and they found the range of their car dumped by 40% or 50% or more because it was so cold outside. That's a real problem. If you lose 40% of the range of a vehicle that has 150-mile best case range, you got a problem.
So let me hop in real quick, Ellen, and just ask the opposite of that question. For our elitists of the elite listeners who just have monies everywhere, what is the best electrical vehicle that someone says, you know what, money's not a problem, I just want to get the best one that there is because I like EVs? Well,
it depends what you want. I mean, if you want performance, there's no question that Teslas offer phenomenal performance. The Model S can do 0 to 60 in something crazy like 2.8 seconds, making it, I think, the quickest production car on the road next to maybe a Bugatti Veyron, and that thing's a $2 million car. So if you want that, certainly the Tesla S would provide it. Let's see, Audi's going to have their e-tron, or they're calling it the e-tron, which is a crossover SUV coming out this year. And that's got some room. So if you want something that's got room and can carry a lot of stuff, that would be a good option for you. Next year, Rivian, if you're familiar with them, they're going to have an electric pickup truck that will serve that purpose, but that's going to start at about $70,000.
Wow. So how far of a range can you expect an EV pickup truck to get? I mean, I live in a place where a lot of people drive pickup trucks.
Yeah, Rivian is claiming that their truck is going to have something like a 300-mile range, which will be great if it does. And a number of EVs are claiming ranges in that ballpark. But again, you get down to that issue of, okay, the range is 300 miles, but you still have that 30 to 45 minute best case recharge time, assuming you can find the high voltage fast charger. And another little asterisk that should be put on this whole discussion is that the battery can only be recharged to 80% at a fast charger, because if you try to charge it to 100%, it actually damages the battery and reduces its service life. So again, you got all these problems, and it gets us, I think, down to the basic question is why? Why are people being pushed so aggressively into electric cars when we've got brilliant internal combustion powered cars that are functionally superior in almost every imaginable way to these electric cars? I think it's an important question to ask.
I'm constantly, wondering why we're pushing this so hard, particularly when, depending on where you charge the car, you will be charging it on some, electricity that is generated using a fossil fuel. And it's also very difficult to make the case for EVs when gasoline is so low right now.
Right.
But I did a little bit of research a while ago into some of the very luxury electric cars, and I do understand. I think maybe James Bond might be a good person who a good candidate for an EV, because he'll really appreciate the torque. When zipping down a Swiss mountain, and clearly the his superiors at MI6 will just be able to pick up the car when he's done with his fast-paced chase and charge it into a portable charger.
Yeah. Now, by the way, there's a funny little story about the quickness of Teslas. The guy's at a drag strip in his Tesla S, and he's challenging all the muscle cars there to a race. And one owner of a muscle car says, "Okay, I'll race you to Florida."
That's funny.
One other question. I just want to ask one more question. What about hybrids? Because that seems like that might actually be a much more viable choice for someone who's interested in that.
Yeah, well, hybrids actually have been hugely successful. They were very, very popular when gas was up at $4 a gallon. And the cool thing about the hybrid is they don't suffer from any of the functional problems that you've got with an electric car, because essentially they carry around their own generator, which is a gas engine. So, they alternate between the gas engine and the electric motor and battery pack, which they also have, those smaller. but you're not tied to a wall outlet. You don't have range anxiety. If the battery runs a little bit low, it's fine. You just gas up and keep going. But the problem with hybrids now, you mentioned a little while ago, that gas prices are really low, and they are. The price disparity, the cost of buying in to a hybrid, it's generally about $3,000 more than an otherwise equivalent non-hybrid. And again, you got to figure out, okay, if I own this car for say 8 years, am I going to save $3,000 worth of gas over that period of time? And you might, but you're not probably going to save a whole lot. The math works out a whole lot better when gas is at $4 or $5 a gallon.
Yeah, I mean they're interesting to drive in, and I say this just because I'm visiting my parents right now, and my mother happens to have a hybrid, and it's a slightly different experience. You almost feel like the car has turned itself completely off when you're waiting at a red light. But she's also she hates pumping gas. So if someone really despises the act of putting gas in their car, I think they'd probably say, well, the cost is worth it.
Yeah, no question. And again, that's a wonderful attribute of an electric car. There's no question that they can do some cool things. It is neat to be able to plug your car in at home if you want to avoid ever having to go to a gas station, and it's okay and you don't mind essentially having to wait 8 hours, or overnight, because that's how long it takes if you plug into regular household current. But still, that can be cool. America is supposed to be the country where people have the freedom to choose. And that's really the nut of this whole debate for me. It's about voluntarism. It's about offering this stuff on the market, and if it can succeed on the merits, I think it's great. My problem is with the government trying to force it down people's throats.
Sure. Well, one other. Sorry, Ryan, to interrupt you. One last question. So, in these states where there are these mandates, are we finding that there are just too many electric vehicles on it? So if electric vehicles are not being purchased, if car companies are forced to make them, but they're not being purchased, then shouldn't they just cut the cost to move these cars off the lot? They've got to make room for, the next year's models or whatnot. Are we finding, can you get a good deal in certain states because there's this government mandate? Is it actually having that effect, or are car companies saying, we're not cutting the cost of these EVs, we're just going to let them sit here?
Well, they lose money on every one that they sell, and that goes across the board, including for Tesla. Tesla does not make money selling electric cars. Tesla makes money selling carbon credits to companies that don't build electric cars. For example, Fiat Chrysler just had to spend something like $2 billion to buy carbon credits to offset the fact that it does not manufacture electric cars, which it has to because of regulatory compliance issues. The whole thing is just a gigantic wealth-shifting, wealth transfer scheme, and it's potentially disastrous economically. What's the median family income in America? Something like $55,000 or $60,000. How does it work out? A mass market electric car like the Leaf that's $30,000, and that's the cheapest one. How does the average American family afford a $30,000 car on a $50,000 annual income?
Forget it.
Right. Yeah, it's absurd. And the real tragedy here is that because of the mandates, we got sexy, high performance luxury sport cars that happen to be electric, Teslas. And that set the paradigm. That made everybody want to produce the same kinds of vehicles. I think if we hadn't had the mandates and the focus on EVs had been on making something that was really efficient and really economical, which used to be the whole point, somebody might have developed a $15,000 electric car. Wouldn't have been particularly quick, but so what? I mean, imagine how cool it would be if you could buy a $15,000 electric car. You never had to buy gas again, and it got you to work as quickly as, say, a K car did back in the 80s. That would be the ticket, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, sometimes in other countries we see very small little EVs that look like they're really just for getting you from like your house to the grocery store and the drugstore and back again, and that also could be a good way to reduce air pollution in certain cities where people don't necessarily drive very far distances or need to go very fast because you can't drive that fast on city streets anyway. Those might be viable options for people who just need,
no question. In an urban environment, if you think about retirement communities that have those little carts that the old people go from their house to the community center, and maybe they can take it down to the grocery store. Something like that scales and works in an urban environment, in a city environment. where, you're just going to be bumping and grinding in traffic. You're never really going to go faster than 25 miles an hour, and you're probably not going to travel farther than 10 miles, right? A little, just a little kind of enclosed box. You don't have to really worry that much about safety and crashworthiness because, if you bump into something at 15 miles an hour, who cares, right? I mean, not much can happen. I think that is the rational way to approach electric cars.
Okay, speaking of another group we like to talk about on this show is the people of the corn people, our favorite folks from the Midwest, the corn delegation. We've news broke, I guess it was late last week, or last week. My weeks are getting messed up now because we missed the show last week. So since we've been off the air, our news broke about Trump administration lifts ethanol fuel ban that was meant to cut smog, according to the New York Times. First off, as the auto expert on the show, let's talk about ethanol. What is your general stance on it as a fuel product? And then let's talk about the Trump administration and what you think about their policies over the last 2 weeks.
Well, ethanol is just alcohol. It's corn alcohol, basically. And it's characterized as renewable because you can grow it. You can make corn. And so there's a federal regulation called the Renewable Fuel Standard, which requires that the gas sold in the United States has to contain a certain percentage by volume of ethanol for renewable fuel purposes. Most of the gas, and I put it in air quotes, that you buy in this country is actually E10, which means that it's 10% ethanol and 90% gas. The problem with it is that ethanol, alcohol, is less energy dense than gasoline. So you're getting basically a diluted fuel, and it does not take your vehicle as far as pure gasoline would. So you're getting a mileage penalty for this ethanol, and it redounds to the benefit of these extraordinarily powerful agribusiness lobbies that have succeeded in getting the renewable fuels mandate passed. And the politicians on both sides of the aisle are absolutely enthralled to and terrified of crossing these gigantic agribusiness cartels, particularly because they're strong in Iowa, big important thing in the presidential election cycle. So nobody wants to talk about it, but it's utterly superfluous, particularly given the fact that America is right now on the cusp of becoming the world's biggest producer of oil, and we may be a net exporter of oil within the next 2 or 3 years. The whole frantic idea that we're about to run out of gas that was current in policy debates for 30, 40 years has been proved to be nonsense. We're apparently, living on a ball full of gas. There's no end to it, apparently.
So just on that real quick, coming from Louisiana, and you might not know the answer to this because it's not car related. I'm just curious. Coming from Louisiana, redneck country. One of the things gasoline stations would put out there was they had ethanol free gas because boaters would love to fill their boats up with ethanol free gas, especially two-stroke motors. Is there actually something to that, or is that more hey?
Oh yeah, there's something big to that. Ethanol is water attractive, which is a big problem for outboard motors, and it's also a problem for vehicles and power equipment that were not designed to handle alcohol-related fuel switch. In addition to bringing moisture into the fuel system, it's also much more corrosive to rubber parts than straight-up gasoline. Now, generally, that only applies to vehicles that were made before the mid-'90s. That's when the whole ethanol thing really kind of picked up and got to be a thing. But yeah, you can look around. There's a site called, I think, puregas.com that will tell you where to find a station in your area that still sells 100% ethanol. I mean, regular gas, ethanol-free gas.
Yeah, we actually. So I'm from I live in North Florida, and a lot of the gas stations in the area sell ethanol-free gas because there's a lot. I think because there's a river that goes right through it, and there's a lot of boating that goes on. But I always wondered if one of the other things that people in my area do is they like to stock up on gasoline for when we have hurricanes and power outages. Should they be buying ethanol-free gasoline for their generators?
Without question, and they also ought to put some stabilizer in there. Stable's a good product. What's the other one? I can't think of it. I'm having a senior moment. There's another good product on the market for that. But yeah, any fuel, gasoline, you want to put it in a sealed container. You want to make sure it's not exposed to air so that it can get moisture in it. And putting the fuel stabilizer in it will definitely help. And for equipment that's not used frequently, things like mowers that in the off season might sit, your best bet is to run it dry or just to drain it so that the carburetor isn't sitting with that fuel in it for 3-4 months at a time.
Okay, let's turn now to, unless you have anything else on that, Ellen. Okay, let's turn now to, and this is, I was talking to you offline about this a little bit, kind of get back to it. One of the things I've heard you on your other stuff talk about is the emission standards and government regulation, and how sometimes government can conflate the issue of saying, well, we're going to put this standard in for the manufacturers, but they're really looking at the wrong data. I don't drive an electric vehicle. I drive a Ford F-250, which is the opposite end of the spectrum from the Tesla. the Tesla. But I love my truck. I'm not giving it up, and I have to put the DEF in there for mine for the. So walk us through just kind of some of the things that maybe just folks like me, or Ellen's really smart, so she probably knows all this stuff. But just your average folks want to know about government regulation as it pertains to fuel emissions and things like that, stuff that's impacting maybe the price of our cars or our gasoline that we just didn't realize.
Well, there's something called CAFE, which is a government acronym for Corporate Average Fuel Economy. And it's a really weird thing. The government got into the business, this goes back to the 70s, of decreeing the average fuel economy that all new cars must meet. And if they don't meet the certain number, then the manufacturer gets hit with these gas guzzler fines. And those gas guzzler fines get passed on to the car buyers. And so what they're trying to do is push everybody into ever more economical cars, no matter how much it costs us. And that's one of the reasons why new cars have ballooned in price to such an extent that the average price paid for a car last year was more than $35,000, a record high. And it's also part of the reason why the average new car loan is now 6 to 7 years instead of 3 or 4, which was once pretty typical. They're going to all these elaborate extremes to try to squeeze out a little bit more mileage out of the cars. They're putting tiny, tiny little 2-liter engines in gigantic big vehicles with 10-speed transmissions and turbochargers, direct injection, all of this stuff because they have to placate the federal government. Now, the bizarre thing is the idea that the car companies would not build the kinds of vehicles that the market wants. If most people really crave 40 or 50 mile per gallon cars, it would be in the interest of the car companies to build them, don't you think?
Right.
Now, what we've got is free choice. There are cars like that are on the market. And of course, you could also go out and buy yourself a 12 mile per gallon, 707 horsepower Hellcat if you wanted to. So my point of view on this is that the government can't stand the fact that people have the choice. And it keeps trying to eliminate the choice by ratcheting up these mileage standards so it gets to the point where the only people who can afford anything but a tiny little economy car are the really rich people. It's no accident that really nice big cars with V8s have become very, very expensive. And that goes for trucks too. It's very easy to spend $50,000 on a 1500 series truck these days.
No, you're right, because I was looking at, actually, when I just bought that F-250, and I was looking at a Tundra, and it was, I think, $55,000, one of them was, and then I think the other model was like $47,000. I ended up getting a slightly used F-250, and close to the same price range. But I was just sitting there thinking, how much longer, we talk about bubbles, we had the housing bubble, we talk about the college tuition bubble. How much longer can this car loan bubble go on? Because 6 to 7 years, you're buying a $70,000 car, and there are people who are working in the oil patch who need a heavy-duty off-road truck, but the work's, as you know, up and down. And so having a $70,000 note attached to your name, you might be in work for 2 years, and then you're off, and that's going to be hard to unload.
It is. And meanwhile, depreciation.
Right.
Whatever you buy today, 6-7 years from now, it's probably going to be worth about 40 to 50% less than what you paid for it. But you haven't paid it off. So you still got this big note on a vehicle that's worth half of what you'd spent. Now, it's all been made possible since the crash back in 2008 by essentially free financing, zero interest or very, very low interest financing, which has obscured the cost of vehicles. That and pushing out the loans to 7, 6, 7, even 8 years has made it seem more affordable by lowering the monthly payment. But that big nut is still there. Lately, interest rates have started to go up, and it's no coincidence that inventories are stacking up, and you can begin to see signs of problems. And I think that we're right now probably on the cusp of that bubble bursting because the vehicles are unaffordable. And, people are looking at the numbers and realizing, geez, I can't do that. I'm not buying that. I'm going to go buy a used car. I'm going to fix what I've got. I can't handle signing up for a $600 a month payment for the next 7 years.
Okay. Last question. We'll let you go here. Pick it. You can pick it how you want to. Car, SUV, truck. Your favorite three on the market. Your favorite for each category right now for the listeners who might be looking to buy a car, SUV, or truck. Obviously, there's a lot of factors, as you know. But if you had to just generally man the street, hey, what would you recommend these three categories? Where would you go right now?
Well, okay, I'm going to have to start with one that's just extraordinary and exotic because it's a fantasy vehicle. Last week, Mercedes sent me. Do you know what the Geländewagen is?
I do not. I have to look it up.
Okay, the G-Class. It's essentially their civilianized version of a military Jeep. It's been around since 1979. It is powered by a twin-turbo hand-built V8 that makes almost 600 horsepower, and it's nearly as quick as a Corvette and will take you places that no Corvette could dare go. Unfortunately, it's $166,000 to start, but as Ferris Bueller said, if you have the means, I highly recommend picking one up. It's spectacular. Cars become so homogenous. They're wonderful. They've never been better in terms of reliability, durability, and all that good stuff, but they've also become, in my opinion, much more same and homogenous. Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell one brand from another. This car, that G63, everybody looks at that. It's like nothing else on the road. So if you really want to stand out, that would be my pick in that category.
That's nice. I looked one up. They are a good-looking vehicle.
Now, let's see. Ford has recently brought back the Ranger nameplate on an entirely new truck, and I had one of those a few weeks as well. Now, like all the other trucks in the class, it is mid-sized now. And it's a really nice truck with one problem. They don't sell it with a regular cab and a long bed, which I think would be fantastic. It comes only in the 4-door variant. You can get it with the crew cab and the 4 full-size doors, or the extended cab with the 2 standard-size doors and the smaller back doors and a short bed, unfortunately. But here's the good news. It comes standard with a 270 horsepower engine, and that's about, 120 horsepower more than the old Ranger came with its little 4-cylinder engine and could barely get out of its own way. And it comes with a standard 7,500-pound tow capacity, which is pretty solid. So if you dig into it, you'll find out that the current Ranger has the same specs and performance and capability just about as many 90s-era full-size trucks. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that is pretty cool. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and get you out of here. We're up against the clock. EP or Eric Peter Autos, either one will get you to his website, epautos.com. Eric, thank you so much for coming on. We've been wanting to have someone talk about this, and would love to have you on in maybe 6 months or whatever when stuff's, I'm sure, we'll get through summer driving season. Okay, thanks again to Eric Peters for coming on. epautos.com is the website, and there's all kind. If you're interested in the cars and stuff, he's got a great website. Again, I've heard him on Tom Woods shows, which is where I found him at. You can go to tomwoods.com, I believe it is. Nate can put it in the show notes and search there, Eric Peters, and you'll find all kinds of stuff if cars are your thing. Ellen, interesting stuff from Eric. It was good to get him on. We've been wanting to have on someone to talk about kind of a little bit more niche and dig in a little bit more on some of the stuff that we cover, but it's good to kind of have an expert that he agrees with people that are brilliant like you and me.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to think about how government regulation has affected the actual development of EVs and how it could have gone differently had the regulations been different, and how we might be seeing vastly different types of electric vehicles these days. It's I guess maybe that's the historian in me is thinking, right, just how much government intervention actually affected the course of the industry's development of these types of cars.
Yep, it was good stuff, and be sure to check out his website. Okay, Ellen, where will you be this week?
This week, I will be on investing.com and on Forbes, and look for, I don't know if it's going to come out this week or next week, but I'm going to have a piece coming up on Bloomberg about, it's going to look at possibility of regime change in Iran, and kind of some interesting pitfalls and things that are going on there and how it might affect the market.
Okay. Well, I will be. Texas Oil and Gas Podcast has been recorded, and we have an Oil and Gas Contractors Connect that's coming out. Obviously, if you're in the Midland, Odessa area, TexasOilAndGasPodcast.com/shrimp. Wednesday night, we have a shrimp bowl. Should have a good little turnout there, and it should be fun. Maybe Ellen can hop on her private jet and fly in to see us.
Yes. My private electric jet.
Your private electric jet. Okay, for listeners, it's good to be back. And you missed us last week. Blame Nate. It's all his fault. And we will talk to you. We're back next week, right, Ellen? We're back on regular schedule, huh?
Yeah. Back on our regularly scheduled schedule.
All right. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.